Hi. Oh
Hey, I
my
got
God.
your Zoom set up.
Sorry?
I just set up the Zoom, but it's working now.
I I can hear that you're talking, but I can't hear what you're saying.
I set up your Zoom. It should be working now, and I can like admit attendees and that sort of thing.
Okay, cool. So you are gonna be the technical Viz, not Luis.
Yeah, who's doing your minutes? Is that me?
I have to check the
So
table.
you have like additional things here. So you can use the Q&A, which is just like it's the normal Q&A. Um, but there's also polls we can do during it. So say if they wanted to vote on something or something, I can also just make a poll quickly for you if you want.
Okay. Trixie's supposed to take notes, but I don't know, man. She's a bit all over the place. So
Yeah,
I hope
I like just I forgot to promote this. Um, so I hope people show up, but some people in the African chat replied, but it's already recording, and I think people will just be able to join, so be ready.
okay. Oh my god. I should have checked my
Also,
camera.
Luis is watching now.
Hmm?
The other thing we can do is we can allow people to talk, but it's only like one attendee at the time at a time, and we have to invite them to unmute.
Oh, I see that Luis is an attendee. Hi, Luis.
But
Oh.
he can only see us. He can only talk in the chat.
Yeah. Hello. Should I do something with my hair? Hello. Oh no, that might. Yeah, that looks better.
To everyone who's in attendance, we're going to be a few minutes. We're just getting started and getting ready.
I joined with the wrong account. I was Louise. I'm back now. 1 second.
Yo, 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 yo. Plants in the picture. Hey everyone, I can see that we have 9 attendees now. We are gonna wait, let's say 2 more minutes to see where we're gonna be at the end of that. Somebody is raising their hand already.
Just for a note for everyone in the chat, this session is being recorded, which means if we allow you to speak during it, this will be recorded and shared. And also if you put stuff in the chat, we're going to also record that, what's going to be kept in the chat, and use it later for creating the multi-year plan.
Yeah, thank you, Roisin. I think we're only waiting for Trixie now because she's supposed to take notes. So I sent her a PM. Let's see. If anybody else here feels the desire to take notes, please raise your hand and then we can get started.
I'm happy to take notes if needed.
Thank you. Okay, well, I say let's get started because it's 5 minutes in and we have a lot to get through. So hello, everyone. Welcome. I am very pleased that we are more than 5 people that I've originally anticipated because this is a cool and important topic. So the reason that we are here today is because it has been suggested to us that we revise the, yeah, somebody just asked in the chats if Trixie is coming. Could you send her a message because my WhatsApp doesn't work from the laptop right now. Thank you, Ruby. Okay, so going back to welcoming everyone. Roisin, do you have anything to say before we get started, actually?
I'm really excited for this session, and I think it's going to be great.
All right, cool. So then back to why we are here today. So it's been suggested that we review our mission and values and vision and all of these official texts that we use to describe SSDP for our stakeholders. And the reason for that is it has been crafted and worded by people who are coming from a certain cultural background, that being the United States, which is completely normal looking at the history of this organization. And this is, we don't look at it as a problem, we look at it as a very, very useful basis that we can work with. So I'm really pleased to see that there are names in the attendees list that I know from our international work. And so the suggestion was that we are considering the wording that we use and the way we frame our work. We consider the Sustainable Development Agenda that is a pretty ambitious long-term plan in kind of creating a better future for all of us, that is endorsed by all of the United Nations institutions, basically the UN family. And us at the global team thought this was a really great idea, although it didn't come from us. But we think that looking ahead of the future of the organization and our projects, it would be really helpful to have a language that makes it much easier for us, even our members at whatever level, to convey the mission of the organization within certain frameworks that people everywhere on both ends of the political spectrum recognize as important parts towards a sustainable future. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have hopefully both of our wonderful interns from the global team, and they are going to, first of all, explain it into a bit more detail what and why the SDGs are, and then we're going to look through the most important ones through a drug policy lens. So I should have sent everyone a deck that includes our agenda for today, and it includes also links to some, I think we still have the links in here, yes, on page 2. The first one is a really, really good summary by the Global Commission on Drug Policy that I sent out. There's a separate link to everyone that I suggest you go through. The gist of the text is only 10 pages and it's easy to read. And then there is the UNDP's development dimensions of drug policy. And we've prepared a little wheel for you for later work. Because during this session, what we would like to do is for everyone to provide their feedback. And I understand that especially the more that we get, more people we have here, it will be a lot of, well, not a lot of, I don't know how it works with Zoom, but in real life, I know people experience some social anxiety, especially if it relates to something so huge or something that comes across so huge as the SDGs. So I should have given access to everyone to this agenda document. And I would like to invite you to comment your thoughts. If something is like really awakens a thought, maybe we were talking about SDG number one is poverty, I think. And if you think of like, especially I encourage the native speakers, if you could think of like a really good and smart sounding verbiage, it doesn't have to be coherent, just throw it in there. So use this document, please feel free to use this as a brainstorming canvas. And with that, I am going to, oh yeah, and we have our current mission statement and value statement also in these documents. You don't have to click around. And so if you have ideas about specific sentences in here that could be better, please feel free to make a comment about that too. And we will see where we're at the end of this session. So I'm now going to share my screen and hand over to Ruby. They have prepared a slide deck that is going to be on your screens. And Ruby, do you want to take over?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So this screen isn't being shared yet, or I can't see it.
So apparently I am not able to share my screen. Roisin, I'm going to send you a link. Maybe you can. Oh, I'm the host now. Okay, maybe I can now. Hello. All right, here we go. Hey. Oh my God.
So go back to the start.
Back. Oh, that was my welcome slide. Here's our current mission statement.
Do you want me to go through the current mission statement and vision, or will we just to have it in everyone's minds, maybe?
Well, yeah, let's read it.
Okay, so this is the introductory of just what this session will explore. I think you've touched on that already, so you can move forward. So the mission statement. SSDP is an international grassroots network of students who are concerned about the impact of drug misuse on our communities, but who also know that the war on drugs is failing our generation and our society. SSDP mobilizes and empowers young people to participate in the political process, pushing for sensible policies to achieve a safer and more just future. SSDP does this while fighting back against counterproductive policies, in particular those that directly harm students and youth. The value statement, SSDP neither condones nor condemns drug use. Instead, we respect the rights of individuals to make decisions about their own health and well-being. We promote youth civic engagement as a critical tool in reforming drug policy. SSDP respects the diverse experiences and identities of our constituents. We develop leaders who advocate for policy changes based on justice, liberty, compassion, and reason. So what are the SDGs? Just have that mission and vision and values in your head as we read through the SDGs and try to see how it links or maybe the gaps that need to be filled. So if anyone doesn't know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were launched in September 2015, made up of 17 goals and 169 targets that set out a plan of action that will shape the mainstream development agenda for the next 15 years. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 development goals that come with it contain a number of important commitments made by 193 UN member states. These include ending poverty and hunger, ensuring health and well-being, fighting gender and societal inequality, protecting the environment, and promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, as well as a pledge to leave no one behind. So, drug policy and the SDGs. There's this really nice, colorful wheel that we're going to come back to later on. We'll come back to this slide, but maybe keep these questions in mind as we as I describe the links of drug policy and the SDGs, and see if you can point out anything that I don't bring up, and maybe link it to SSDP a little bit more. So how are they linked? How do they support each other? How do they contradict? How are SDGs relevant to the work of SSDP? How is SSDP contributing towards these goals? What could SSDP do to support the achievement of these goals, and how? I'm going to pass over to Trixie now. Can I pass over to you? Can you take the slides from here? Or I'll just continue, it's okay. And then you can take over SDG 3. Okay, so leaving no one behind. The 2030 agenda, actually just hold on one second there. So the 2030 agenda united the international community around the slogan, no one left behind. It is important that we ensure that this means leaving no individual behind who uses drugs or any affected community. It is essential that we make efforts, special efforts, to provide public services and support to people who use drugs in communities that have not been harmed by the so-called war on drugs. If we do not change drug policies worldwide, they will not be aligned with the Sustainable Development Agenda. This war on drugs holds countries back from achieving their development goals, which is why SSDP's mission of fighting against the war on drugs is important to the achievement of these goals. The tagline, no one will be left behind, is important to the Sustainable Development Goals, but what does this mean for people who use drugs, often the most left behind in every country and community? In the outcome document of the special session of the United Nations General Assembly on the World Drug Problem, the UN member states acknowledged that efforts to achieve the global goals and to address the world drug problem were complementary and mutually reinforcing. Illicit drug markets and efforts to address them cut across every one of the SDGs and the commitment to leave no one behind. Ensuring drug policy and the 2030 agenda are coherent is essential to the achievement of the commitments made by the UN member states. So there's a group of...
Can I stop you for a second here? Because I have seen that there have been some comments and I want to pause to see if there are any questions so far. So, oh, how is it going to come back? Chat. Oh, okay, that was all Roisin directly to me. All right, let's see if we have any questions so far. Or comments or ideas or thoughts. Okay then. Let's carry on. Back to you, Ruby.
Great. So here's a list. I'm not going to read them out as we're going to talk about them in a minute, but just the relevant Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals that are relevant to SSDP's mission. And I'm just going to go through them. We can maybe stop after each goal and see if there's any comments or questions like immediately after, and then maybe a broader discussion later on. So yeah, we can move on.
Oh.
So SDG 1, no poverty. So the SDGs are trying to improve the quality of life of the most marginalized and vulnerable through ensuring that they have access to basic services, employment, and education. Most drug control policies worldwide have worsened poverty and marginalization instead of trying to tackle why it is that people get involved in the legal drug market in the first place. In places where drug trafficking is common, there are often very few opportunities in the legal economy to earn money, and most steps undertaken by global drug control efforts, have exacerbated poverty and marginalization instead of tackling the underlying causes of involvement in the legal drug market. A purely repressive approach towards drugs also fails to recognize that for millions of people worldwide, organized such as in Afghanistan, Mali, and areas of Brazil, for instance, like I just said, the illegal drug market provides incomes, basic services, and stability that the state fails to provide. These repressive efforts have largely been counterproductive, especially among those most vulnerable ethnic minorities and the poorest communities in rural and urban settings. Another example of how it inhibits poverty reduction is opium, coca, and cannabis are cultivated in some of the most isolated areas of the world, where the state's presence tends to be limited to law enforcement interventions to destroy illegal crops and arrest farmers engaged in their cultivation. Many of these areas are also plagued by high levels of inequality and unequal access to land tenure. The destruction of farmers' sole means of survival does little more than push them further into poverty. Back to you, Ashley.
Thank you. So technically, people who are involved in drug cultivation are usually the most vulnerable anyway, and the drug war kind of trying to solve the issue through them is just making the poor even poorer in the global sense, right? And so that made me think of some conversations I've had in my own circles, that some people think that certain drugs are already illegal to them because they are on a certain level of society, you know. So I think that the drug war kind of influencing SDG #1 is visible in many, many levels. So I want to see if there is anybody who would like to add anything to this bit. Or, yeah, here we go. There were some comments. Would you like to expand on that a bit, Luis? Okay, am I the one who's giving people on?
Or if you just go to the attendee section and click on Luis.
I couldn't do that when I was sharing the screen. Hello, Luis.
I think I am muted. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So the ways that addressing drug policy reform and bringing about more humane, more sensible drug policies, in order to end hunger, we would need to strive to create structures that would, or poverty, my apologies. We would need to strive to create structures that provide that level of support to individuals as they're trying to sort of navigate the socioeconomic conditions. And as that relates to responsible consumption and production, I'm thinking about like the legal cannabis industry here in the US, and the need to be involved in making sure that regulations are created that are not only what's the term? That are not only like functionally, I don't know if acceptable is the right term, but like businesses are able to function under them while still holding them to a standard that protects people's health and interests on the whole. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about, after having read some of the other sustainable development goals, how that would kind of tie into some of these other efforts that are coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So, wow, okay. There are two more really good inputs. How do I kick you out, Luis? I'm gonna allow to talk Jacob, and let's see if you both are on. Here we go. Okay, Jacob, you have the mic on you.
Okay, perfect. So you can hear?
Yes.
Perfect. So just wanted to add that maybe a fruitful addition to this conversation, to put it in more specific terms, is that to specify, of course, as Louise said, that there are larger, more structural barriers to ending poverty, but at least one route of administration, or at least in one sense, framing this as lifting some of the barriers for communities who otherwise would be successful in the things they already do, especially the communities which are growing coca, cannabis, poppies in different parts of the world, to be able to enter the legal market. So it's not even that this work necessarily involves creating new opportunities, but rather just lifting the barriers for the people who already have these opportunities so they can prosper legally, so they can enter an already existing market. So I think this would just put it in a bit more like actionable terms, what policy change in this space would mean.
Oh yeah, I love that wording, because especially at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, there's a lot of talk about alternative development that aims to exactly what you were saying, like retrain these farmers to try to apply their skills into cultivating, I don't know, coconuts, where they have no traditional link to this particular plant. And then, yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to disable you, unless you wanted to say, okay, let's bring you back. No, I will move on to Jofi.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good sign. No, Jacob covered a lot of what I also had in mind in terms of removing barriers. So just to add to that, like by including these different social groups, social sectors, and giving them space in the discussions relating to drug regulation and into the decision making, it's also like opening the tap to a really large pool of knowledge. Because what you were also saying, they know a lot. They have very different considerations from the mainstream policymaking mindset that has been unfortunately dominant in these processes, and that could change a lot for the better, I think.
Yeah, totally. I'm thinking about wording, and so what I've put down just in my notes to empower like all parts of the supply chain, as far as I am, all links of the supply chain. Okay. And then I'm reading Jacob wanted to add something. So before I bring on Jason, I will bring Jacob back on. There were some snaps to what you had to say, Jacob, before.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just as I think this is an important point for SSDP as a whole, because so many of these discussions circle around, like you said, yeah, conversations about retraining people and providing opportunity, but so much what these conversations also implicitly assume is that some model of authority, some body of authority is the one who says what types of opportunities are appropriate, what opportunities are right for communities for which they have no idea over. So I think this is just something to keep in mind, that when we're framing it as opening opportunities for people to do the things they already want to do, it doesn't assume that we or any other definitive authority know what's right for their needs, right? Mm-hmm. Basically making way for SSDP to accommodate self-realization, I guess is a good way to put it, in terms of communities know themselves best, they know their practices best, and yeah, and I think this is a really appropriate stance for SSDP as a whole to take, and not, especially when we're thinking about being globally inclusive and not being forcefully top down or assuming the needs of people we might not even understand, right? So yeah, I just thought this was important to add in terms of organizational, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, absolutely. We should preach, well, we should practice what we preach, because this is one of our advocacy points, that all these decision makers who haven't been young for 30 years decide what is good for us and how to keep us safe. I think is the same logic can apply to, as I said, like all links of the supply chain. So I saw that Jason has said something that is relevant to our previous thought we had about the, Jason, I'm gonna invite you to talk and disable Jacob.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, so I wasn't thinking I was going to chat live, but just something that I learned from the corporate cannabis industry is that we got to make sure as we legalize, this is why I do like the leave nobody behind phrase, because what we've seen is actually a way for the corporate interests to make criminalization happen again, but for unlicensed producers, rather than calling them legacy market. It's still, they're using the state to use violence against people that are producing drugs. And that's after legalization happens. And so what ends up happening then, you have a very direct use of the state to support corporate interests in a way that is pretty gross, in my opinion. But on a global scale, one thing we've seen is that as we legalize, the state often picks winners and losers of who's allowed to grow and who isn't. And so in Colombia, part of the peace agreement with the FARC was predicated on that the farmers would be able to continue to grow and provide for their families, but not all of them were included in the new legal system, and it was too small of a new legal system to include everyone. So you had some farmers that were now state sponsored and some farmers that were still criminalized even after they thought they had come to a peace agreement around this particular issue. So, you know, making sure that it is 100% of people that are doing this will be able to do it without repercussions is going to be very important, because what I'm seeing happening is a very small percentage of producers are allowed to produce and everybody else is still a criminal. And so as we think about how to draft legal, sustainable, healthy markets, right, for our communities, the issue of licensing becomes very, very important to have examples of how to do it correctly and how to make sure that we don't have a false victory where we think we legalize something and actually 99% of the people will still be enforced. So I think that's something we can learn from the current corporate cannabis industry, and that it is a different opponent, right? Like we're adding a new layer of corporate opposition in what we're trying to do that's not necessarily moralistic. It's about production, right? And who controls the money. And so just want to make sure that as we have those discussions, because it is very beneficial for our communities to do it correctly, that we include the challenges that we're learning from here in the States.
Yes, thank you. Actually, this is something that we haven't talked about between us as we were preparing, that as we plan, is the outcome of, or like the notes from this conversation, we are going to our multi-year planning. So as we plan our multi-year advocacy, it's important that we advocate for things that are also sustainable. So when we have an idea of this ideal future world that we are pushing towards, we have to keep all of these things in mind. So yeah, I thank you everyone for your, wait, I'm gonna disable Jason. So thank you everyone for your input. I wonder if we can save the chat later to add to the document, but I was, okay, somebody's nodding. Cool, thank you, Tracy. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen again to carry on with the presentation. Oh man, here we go. And then you can take it over, Ruby. Or Trixie's up.
Trixie's up next. Got one more left from me.
Okay.
So we got Sustainable Development Goal 3 is good health and well-being. So, or is it you now, Trixie, actually? Nod or shake your head. It's not now, cool. Don't want to take that away from you. So, it's good health and well-being. So people who use drugs, especially those who inject drugs, are particularly vulnerable to bloodborne infections such as HIV and hepatitis C, which I'm sure all of us know. People who inject drugs are more vulnerable to tuberculosis with a prevalence rate of 8% compared to 0.2% in the general population. These health issues can be easily prevented through non-discriminatory access to health care and harm reduction, but instead of reducing drug-related risk and harm with a comprehensive health strategy, many governments have chosen to put in place measures that heavily punish people who use drugs. Prisons and other closed settings are particularly fertile grounds for the spread of diseases, and people who use drugs, who comprise a significant proportion of those incarcerated, are most at risk. Some governments have responded to illegal crop cultivation with aerial fumigation campaigns, generally by using harmful herbicides such as glyphosate. I'm so sorry. Aerial fumigation has caused severe harm to the environment as well as the health of local communities. Palliative care, so another example of how it impacts the achievement, is palliative care and pain relief constitute essential elements of universal health coverage. Yet 5.5 billion people have limited or no access to internationally controlled medicines such as morphine, including 5.5 million with terminal cancer and 1 million with late-stage AIDS. It is also estimated that 92% of the world's supply of morphine is consumed by only 17% of the population concentrated in the global north. For instance, China and, for an example of this is China and Egypt who put pressure on the international community to schedule ketamine in the international drug control treaties. The World Health Organization's expert committee on drug dependence has repeatedly recommended against such a move, as it would severely restrict the availability of the substance as an anesthetic in countries with fragile health systems. Back to you.
Oh yeah, I wanted to. I have been a witness to these debates around ketamine, and it's quite ridiculous. You have a number of countries that are pressing for harsher sanctions on them in international conventions because there is apparently an abuse issue. But funnily, or not so funnily, those are the countries where access to pain medication is like traditionally really, really limited. Um, so yeah, another comment I wanted to add, how do I exit this here? Yeah, another thing I wanted to add is that the health and well-being is health and well-being of all people, and especially youth, is one of the basics or like the main, well, how do I say, like the main goals of the drug control conventions. So yeah, this is something that we can very heavily leverage. And let me give a look. No, here we go to the chat. The last question. I'd be curious to hear why SDG 11 isn't in consideration for those relevant to SSDP. Which one was 11?
We didn't specifically include 11, but we all had a really good question whether housing was included under health. And I just answered that in the chat saying that sustainable cities and communities, including adequate housing and how it ties into, how it ties into health consequences is SDG Goal 11. And to Will's question, we highlighted these SDGs as like the most important, but I think the most important thing about SDGs is that they're so interconnected. So like health is addressed under housing, environment is addressed under poverty. So I think all of the SDGs are important for SSDP. We just decided to highlight these ones to kind of lead the conversation. But we'll be happy to like distribute like more materials about what the SDGs actually entail and how it relates to the work that we do, if that's something that's helpful to people. Does that answer the question?
It looks like you did. And now I'm going to unmute Roisin. So you can maybe share. I can't find you in the chat.
It's because I'm here.
Oh, hello. Okay, so I wanted to unmute you because you responded to this thought I had about the access to pain medication. And yes, I don't know if I have said it's particularly an issue for global South and African countries. So if you want to share a little bit about the experiences of our network there.
Yeah, no, I think it's just really important that we recognize that the kind of lack of access to pain medication is a really huge part of drug policy work globally, but particularly for our chapters in West Africa where tramadol use is like one of the most used drugs, both like recreationally and non-recreationally. It's really important for us to recognize that, and I think it's a really different framing to kind of traditionally how SSDP has looked at drug policy. But I think it's really important, and you know, the reason tramadol is so prevalent in West African countries is due to the lack of access to things like morphine. So yeah, and it's the same thing with the codeine use in like countries like Liberia as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how like it's pretty much the same issue of just messed up drug control systems and education all over the globe. And then at one point, like in North America, it's an overprescription is the main issue that's debated. And then in the rest of the world, or more like south of that, it's the lack of access and kind of the stigma even within health professionals to prescribe something like that. All right, I'll go back to sharing my screen again and hand it over to our panelists. Whoever's up next.
So this one's actually me. So excuse me. So the next sustainable development goal that we decided to highlight was gender equality. Agenda 2030 words it as a goal to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So yeah, that's the wording. The reason why this is, I think, very important for drug policy is that we still see that women tend to be more vulnerable when they're involved in the illegal drug trade, because gender inequalities make it more difficult to access education and employment in most contexts. And again, in most contexts worldwide, drug policies criminalize people who use drugs, which increases stigma and marginalization, and it further makes it more difficult for women to access education, employment, health and social services due to a fear of being arrested, and because of lack, most health services lack expertise or capacity to provide services that are specific to the needs of women, which can be very different to the needs of men, both in terms of harm reduction and potential other treatment facilities. So where we see the most impact, I think currently, is Latin America and Asia, where the female prison population is increasing exponentially, which has devastating effects for families. And we also see that most of these women are incarcerated for nonviolent first-time drug offenses. I guess one important factor to add to this is that I think women in general experience more stigma for drug use. And there are other factors like when they're pregnant or if they have children that just goes through the roof, which has led to like instances of like sterilization campaigns in Kenya and even in like the United Kingdom a couple of years ago, as short as a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think this remains an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned something really important with the increasing prison population among women, is that these institutions that advocate for the SDGs and gender equality also are centering the family as a unit and the importance for young people to grow up in like a supportive, full family environment. But there is some, in my experience, there's a lack of connection between how a mother who has a first-time nonviolent drug offense is being taken away from their family, or her children are taken away from her. How does that help the future of young people in living a, in quotations, sober life? So let's go back to our comments. Let's see if there are any questions or suggestions.
I can answer Jofi's question about LGBTQ communities under this gender goal. To me, it's a very binary understanding of gender under this specific goal. I'm not sure if the rest of the SDGs have a different perspective, to be honest, but it's like, yeah, I think it's very closely tied to like family units as well. Yeah, that's all I can say about it. I don't want to say something that's incorrect, but in my reading, the LGBTQ communities, and including like transgender women, wouldn't be included under this goal, which I think is problematic. But
yeah, unfortunately, there's very little talk or mention of transgender people or any kind of person identifying outside of the binary at the UN. And I think that kind of makes it difficult for them or for anyone to advocate for those rights. You know, if they're not sorted into that kind of human or that kind of human. Okay. Wow, this is a heavy topic. Okay, so let's move on. And we are going to talk about the environment. Oh, just a time check, guys. We have 15 more minutes and we have 3 slides to go through. So I suggest that we lump the last 2 in one because they're kind of, yeah, I think they could work. All right, let's move to environment related SDGs. That's also 3 in 1.
Yeah, this is 3 in 1 and there's 2 more, but I can try to wrap it up. And also we've shared the slides, I'm pretty sure, so you can always read more about it. But yeah, on this slide, you can see the environment related SDGs. And there are a couple, obviously this is very high on the agenda. In terms of drug policy, what really hasn't been taken into account is that, as most of us know, like crop destruction and crop eradication policies are still so popular for some reason. And they've, in addition to destroying communities, communities of farmers, communities just living on the land, they've destroyed the soil, the water, the air, large areas of land, not just the areas actually growing drugs, but also areas growing food. So this is actually leading to a livelihood crisis for people who depend on this. It further exacerbates inequalities. Yeah, I think that sums it up in the shortest way possible. So you can go to the next slide if you want, which is SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I think it's obvious. And then SDG 17, partnership for the goals. We decided to highlight this because the SDGs are so complex, as you can kind of get a gist. And also, as you know, our global drug policy reform movement is also very complex. A lot depends on partnerships and how we prioritize and how we think about what we're actually trying to achieve. And yeah, I think the main argument when talking about drug policies and the sustainable development goals is that we simply cannot achieve the goals set out by the United Nations and the sustainable development goals if we don't reform the way that we do drug policy, because they simply contradict each other. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the summary of the most, yeah, we should have said that in the beginning that we selected a few that we, as we were talking, thought were the most relevant, they were most easy to talk to in this section. And I specifically like this last one because it could be really, really useful in our advocacy and fundraising when we talk about how we are bringing together academia, civil society, certain communities representatives, and the private sector as well with decision makers. So I think it's really important for us to recognize our role in it. I think we're in a very unique position to be a youth-led organization present on the most regions of all the youth-led or drug policy organizations of either ideology. So I think it puts us in a really good position to advocate for being a worthy partner to achieve these goals. So yeah, I was really glad to see the suggestion for this session. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but before I do that, come down. I'm gonna just stop so I can read the comments. Yeah, stigma and discrimination can be tied to many of the things that we have talked about today. Everyone deserves their rights. Yes. And so this is what I was saying, that it's really difficult in when it comes to advocacy for people who don't identify within the binary, that sometimes it's hard for them to even prove that they are a human and they deserve their rights. All right. Let's go back to our reel. Maybe I will share this, but wait. I am so sorry, guys. I feel like a typical teacher from the 90s who has no idea how to use any kind of technical equipment. Okay, so here is our wheel. So let's see what we should zoom in on. I feel like, okay, this is not gonna work if I want to share my screen and also decide who to unmute. Okay. Everybody has their slides, you guys. So please take, yes, Trixie?
I was gonna say the same thing, that people could pull it up on their slides, or it's in the meeting documents as well.
Yeah. So I want to open the floor also to our panelists, if you would like to say anything before we go into this exercise. And the exercise is basically us going back to the reflection questions that Ruby has put on the slide very kindly, I think is the sixth. Oh, I didn't send people the slide deck. I'm going to do that now. Here we go, in case you would like to see the questions again. So what we want to include in our revised mission is kind of linking all of these issues together. Yes, Roisin is copying the questions now to the chat. Thank you, Roisin. And I would encourage all of you to think about how they support each other, and especially how they support each other from a youth perspective, as in how is this, all of this relevant to your life and your peers' life. And this would be a time to raise it if any of them is contradicting. So I would like to go into discussion about the first three questions and looking for people to share their thoughts. Also, yeah, I'll talk later. Let's see who would like to say anything. Trixie, Ruby, do you wanna maybe inspire discussion on this?
As like a placeholder, can I talk a little bit about my frustration about the whole SDG framework?
Go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a lot of goals, and if you folks go and like look at it, under each of the goals there's like 100 more sub-targets, and they are very quantitative, which I think is never really good, and I think that's very obvious in some things that we already pointed out that are kind of still missed by, and I feel like it's kind of ridiculous because it's a lot of goals. Like it's supposed to basically cover everything that's a problem in the word, but it missed LGBTQ people. So I just actually researched it a little bit, and I'm gonna link the article in the chat for everybody who's interested. But yeah, like similarly to the drug policy reform movement, LGBTQ communities have been calling out the SDGs for not explicitly taking into account people's needs. So yeah, I think this SDG framework is, it just sounds good, but I don't think it's achievable and not in the timeline that was set out. So I think implementation has also been, yeah, subpar.
Yeah, I gotta agree. Like, I really like this last question. How do they contradict? Because to me, they don't contradict with each other, but with all of these institutions and functional commissions that endorse, even individual ones, with their work and other policy papers, they do contradict them. So
yeah, like in my understanding, if we're, yeah, for example, if we're trying to protect the environment, that's what one of the agencies says, and the other agency is like, yeah, let's go and use very harmful pesticides to eliminate this crop that might even be legal in other countries, or it might even be legal in that country or have huge cultural significance, like I'm thinking of Bolivia right now. Let's eradicate that. Let's eradicate people's livelihoods. Let's contaminate the soil, the water, the air, the food. To me, that's contradiction. And that's carelessness, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that when they get countries propose panelists for commission meetings, and then they are just pretty much just boasting about all of these measures that they have taken that might achieve like a really nice number at the end of the year for their whatever law enforcement reach, but it's working actively against reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. All right. Jacob says that the SDGs thing give, oh yes, come on into the conversation, Jacob.
Yeah,
Hello?
oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, I think it's important to add that although we cannot, yeah, of course we cannot expect the UN and all the member states to actually carry out the SDGs, and I hate that I have to say that, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's worth saying just so we don't, you know, if we can expect it not to grow so cynical about it, because they do give us a lot of opportunity to do our work within a more, quote, legitimate framework, right? So like solutions, like I just said in the chat, like pushing for opioid substitution therapy, needle exchanges and such, things which can be very controversial. I think the fact that the SDGs are so broad, which is in some sense a drawback, they do give us the chance to frame the work that we want to do within the UN language, which makes it much easier to prove to states or local authorities or push for solutions to these bodies using language which is seen universally or more or less universally as legitimate. And there's something to be said for our ability to co-opt the reputation of institutions which haven't always worked in our favor or towards good drug policy or towards good governance. But we can kind of flip that with their goals and their framework to put forward solutions that we think are equitable and just and fair. So although they do fall short in not being specific and not being strictly enforced or necessarily carried through, I think it's an opportunity to rethink, like, who do we expect to carry these things through? Because it can totally be us, because it's not like these SDGs are made for other people, right? They're made for supposedly everybody. So I think they do offer us at least some really good conceptual opportunity to do the work we want to do.
Ooh, I heard some gold nuggets in there to work into our new mission statement. Especially strong was the who's expected to carry out these actions. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so Jason's, you seem to be a bit thrown when I got you in the conversation before, but let's see if you could elaborate on the comment you just made.
Sure, this time you got me mid-bagel. So I think just in a lot of ways, drug policy is seen as a criminal justice conversation, like almost exclusively, where being able to broaden it out to more tables, whether that be economic development, whether that's health and research, right? It broadens who we're engaging with and how we're framed in those tables, right? So like in the criminal justice table, we're framed as people that use drugs, they want to legalize so that they can use more drugs or whatever, right? So that's one situation that we have to deal with, one set of stigma. But if we shift over to like an economic development conversation, that stigma may not apply anymore. It may, right? Depending. Obviously, those are very conservative tables for sure, but you're going into it with a different relationship, I think, with the other folks that are making policy. And so I think this broadening of how we look at where drug policy fits in the global agenda for lots of things, I think, you know, having those fresh conversations and opportunities to build fresh relationships is, you know, like priceless. And so I definitely think there's lots that make sense here in doing that. in shaping it under sustainable development, of course, because I do think under sustainable communities, our work absolutely applies.
Mm. Thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that was the main reason that we decided to have this conversation, so that we can broaden our reach and, so to say, besides criminal justice reform. And I think that will go into the consideration of writing the multi-year plan as to how to make sure that everything that we have touched on today and seem to have an understanding or agreement on, how are we going to use that to describe what SSDP does, to exactly convey that we are more than just a criminal justice reform group. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We have come to an end of the hour. I feel like this session should have been a bit longer, so we can do, we could have more conversations. I think that the plan writing committee won't start working until all of the sessions are done. So we have a good 2 weeks. If anybody feels like adding to this document that I've linked in the invite, it might transform a little bit into like actual suggestions based on what we've heard today. I plan to listen to the recording of today and the minutes and kind of formulate suggestions for the planning committee. And I invite everyone to take part in that process. I might even send out another email to all of you to remind you where you can reach all of the resources and where you can put your input in. I really wish we had a half an hour more, but I'm gonna have to end this session now. I want to open the floor one more time to see if anybody feels like they would like to say something, but didn't have a chance so far. But I also encourage you to please feel free to get in touch with me or Trixie or Ruby. Maybe Roisin not, because she's swamped with work, but we would love to chat to you further about the SDGs and drug policy and advocacy. So, oh yeah, thank you so much. Roisin just linked in the document that we're going to use to work on our suggestions. And special thanks for Jason and Jacob for their inputs. So somebody has their hand up. Yay! Hello, Carmen.
Hey, folks. Just wanted to say hi. I'm Carmen Jackman. I'm the newly hired development associate. So I just wanted to say this was a great presentation. Thank you all for sharing. And yeah, it really puts me, kind of broadens my mindset for the work I'll be taking on, and I'm very excited.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, Carmen.
Thanks for joining us. Good to have you on board.
For sure. Yeah, great to meet you all. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you too.
Lovely to meet you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to let you all go with this. And I really hope that we stay in touch. Thank you so much, Ruby. Thank you so much, Trixie. And thank you, Roisin, for helping today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for a lovely session.
Please add to the notes because it's been patchy. But feel free to add any comments you might have.
I wrote by hand. 2 pages are full with my notes, so I will add them later.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. It's funny because it's still recording.
Yeah, I wanted to. Oh,
I hope we're gonna upload it to like YouTube like this.
Do you want to stop cloud recording? Yes.